Alright, so I'm back with another video here, and in this video I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be going over an opening that I've used in the past as a surprise weapon, and I am going to show you how to play it. So if you don't know it already, it's called the Nimzowitsch Sicilian, or Nimzo Sicilian. I'm going to go ahead and show it to you right away. So e4, c5, bam, Sicilian defense on board. Know it. So knight f3, and then the Nimzowitsch Sicilian. Is knight to f6. So generally speaking, d6, e6, knight c6, all would lead to an open Sicilian after pawn to d4. I say, okay, I don't want to deal with the open Sicilian. I don't feel like studying a ton of theory. I want to play knight to f6. I want to play the Nimzo Sicilian, and I want to catch my opponent off guard here. Okay, so first thing you need to know about the Nimzo Sicilian. You're hitting this pawn on e4. If white does not defend that pawn, take it. Secondly, the main move is pawn to e5, and we'll look at that in a second. But if white plays knight to c3, the move that I'm going to suggest here is pawn to d5. This will most likely catch your opponent off guard. After knight to c3, he's probably expecting you to play something like d6, and maybe we can take it back into a open Sicilian. No, I don't want that. I'm going to play pawn to d5 here. If e takes d5, knight takes d5, bishop to b5 check, you can go bishop d7. Knight e5 is the best try, but not many people are going to find that. And even then, you can go e6, and you're probably doing fine there. And queen f3, I mean, that's probably the best way to try and take advantage of it. But here, if something like knight takes e5, queen takes e5, or d5, this is pretty good for black. I mean, it's pretty equal, I'd say, overall. Nothing to be scared of at all. So after d5, I think what black certainly has ways to equalize. So that's an interesting line. So after d5, there are a few things that white can try here. So e takes d5 is an interesting try, and bishop b5 check followed by bishop d7 is also an interesting try. Those are pretty reasonable. And a move that's not so great that guys will try here is pawn to e5. So this move is not really anything scary, I don't think. And I would suggest a couple moves here, but the move that I find really fascinating is actually knight to e4. So knight to e4 here, it's not the engine's top choice, but after bishop to b5 and bishop to d7, I think black has pretty decent chances. Maybe white can go e6 potentially and give up a pawn, try and get some positional counterplay. But I really think after bishop takes d7, queen takes d7, I think black is doing quite well here. And really the best move that the computer is suggesting is knight to e2. And that's the only move that's really giving an advantage, and that's a very difficult move to spot intuitively. The whole point of knight to e2 is that you want to play d3 and try and trap the knight. But that's not very intuitive, and even after knight to e2, you can just go pawn to c4 and free up a square for that knight. But being that knight e2 is really the only move that gives white any sort of advantage, I would say that black is doing quite well here. So back here in this position, after knight to c3, d5 generally leads to pretty good positions for black, so just know that. Okay, so let's get back to the main line. Actually, let's take a look at a couple of the other sidelines. So let's look at the main line. So e5, knight to d5 is played, and then there are several moves that white can play here, and there's only one that I would be concerned about. Knight to c3 is the main line, and that is the only one that I think presses for an advantage for white. If white goes d4 here, I would suggest c takes d4. If they play c3, it'll be back in a lap in Sicilian. If they go knight takes d4, you can simply go knight to c6 here, and you should be doing quite well, just generally speaking. So d4 is not really a big concern. If c3 is played, this generally will lead to a simplification, not a simplification, a transposition to a lap in Sicilian after c3 and d4, whereupon you can just go knight c6 and then trade on d4 and then play d6 and chip away at this center. So C3 is not really a super intimidating move. Neither is C4. C4, generally speaking, knight C7 can be pretty good. You can look to fianchetto this bishop. You can look to maybe even stick this knight on E6 and focus on this D4 square. But the point is, after C4, D4 becomes a little bit of a hole. So I would say the only move to be concerned with here is knight to C3. If bishop to C4 here, you can go knight to B6 and knight C6, and you should be doing quite well. So knight to C3 is really the only move that I would say brings about some concerns. But even so, I think there are certainly ways that black can try and play this. So there are two main moves here. There's pawn to E6, reinforcing this knight, and there's also knight takes C3. So I think E6 is some complicated theory, and after knight takes D5, knight takes D5, E takes D5. D4 can lead to some complicated theory if you want to play knight to C6. However, in this position, I would just suggest the move pawn to D6. And I think black has plenty of chances here. White's best play is bishop to B5 check, but then you can go knight to C6. And after queen E2, I think after bishop to E7 or bishop to E6, I think black is still doing quite well here. E takes D6, queen takes D6, D takes C5, queen takes D5 is probably white's best try, just to try and give black this isolated queen pawn. But even in that case, I think black is doing fine and has plenty of chances. But that's really, that's like best play. And I think there are certainly chances for black here in that case. So after knight takes D5, I would probably recommend playing D6 after E takes D5. And if knight to E4 here, the critical move that you need to become familiar with is pawn to F5. And generally, black is doing quite well in those positions, but they're relatively unbalanced, so there's a lot going into it. But I would say here I wouldn't be too concerned. I would say knight takes D5, E takes D5, D4, D6, and I think bishop to B5 check is white's best try, but that's not necessarily the easiest continuation to find. And I think E6 leads to some pretty comfortable positions, but if you want to avoid that isolated queen pawn position, I would suggest playing knight takes C3 here, and then after D takes C3, I wouldn't be concerned about playing B takes C3. D takes C3 is the critical line, and then I would suggest knight to C6, and then after something like bishop to F4, I would suggest a move like H6 or E6. I think E6 makes a lot of sense, so let's take a look at that. And then let's just say white plays bishop to C4 here. The plan for black is going to be to play something like queen C7, B6, bishop B7, and you're a little bit cramped, but you have plenty of chances to counterattack at the right moment if white is not on his toes. So let's say something like B6 happens, and then let's just say queen to D2, looking to castle queenside. This is a typical way that this might go. So you would go, let's say bishop to B7, castle queenside, and then after something like H6 or A6, I think black is going to be doing quite well. A6 makes a lot of sense, looking to play pawn to B5 here. And then if something like bishop to D3, dropping the bishop back, you still have pawn to B5, and I think black is doing quite well here. And if castle kingside, you can still look to do something like this. Queen C7, if rook A to D1, you can look to do something on the other wing in this case, where H6 and maybe G5 makes sense, or just H6 and then bishop to E7. Regardless, I think that black is doing quite well, and there are plenty of chances here. But generally speaking, when you play the Nimzowitsch Sicilian, you're going to know more about it than your opponent, and it's going to catch them off guard generally, because generally when they go E4, knight F3, they're looking to play an open Sicilian with pawn D4, and knight F3 or knight F6 kind of throws a wrench into that. So I just wanted to highlight this opening, and I think it can be used as a very good surprise weapon. You even see it occasionally at the top level played just for surprise value. And I just wanted to highlight this opening and highlight some main ideas. And that's going to be all for this video, but hopefully you like this type of opening video, and maybe I'll make more in the future. So make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.